When I left, Venezuela was ready to collapse. We would have taken it over. We would have gotten all that oil. It would have been right next door.
I just noticed this little seed. The reason the U.S. can spend $1 trillion, literally $1 trillion on military and intelligence every year is because we can print all the money we want and it doesn't destroy our currency. The reason the U.S. can print all the money they want and it doesn't destroy the currency is because a significant portion of oil is bought and sold around the world in dollars. Long story short, we need oil to be bought and sold in dollars or the U.S. down the tube. All the money loses its value. The U.S. stops being powerful, etc.
We won't have to talk about sanctions in 5 years because there'll be so many countries transacting in currencies other than the dollar that we won't have the ability to sanction them.
Syria, a lot of oil, but the U.S. doesn't want it sold. They dropped the petrodollar. So the U.S. doesn't want Syrian oil sold outside of petrodollar. What do? We tried to collapse Syria, but we couldn't collapse it all. So we now own, quote unquote, if you look at the map, the U.S. has about a third of Syria as ours. We run it basically, or at least control it. And that third of Syria is the majority of the oil fields and the wheat. And why do we have that oil field? Because it means that oil will not be sold outside the petrodollar. Collapsing Iraq. Iraq dropped the petrodollar. Oil would have been sold outside the petrodollar. Collapsing Libya. Gaddafi was going outside the petrodollar. Tons of oil with Libya. Gaza actually has also just found tons of oil. I mean, several years ago, tons of oil off their coast, which they're not allowed to get to. Which if they were allowed to get to it, they would sell it outside of the petrodollar. And Iran, of course, still sells their oil outside the petrodollar, which is why the U.S. hates Iran more than anything, right? Iran is number one on the list other than Russia and China. There's one other that is always on the list of most hated countries, Venezuela, right? We despise Venezuela. We've tried to coup Venezuela every 12 minutes. We come up with something. We send people in on boats trying to coup them. We arrested Chavez and couped him for about 2 days before the people rose up and got him back in power. We announced Guaido as the president of Venezuela when he'd never been voted for.
Is the true and legitimate president of Venezuela, Juan Guaido.
At all in Venezuela. We've done everything we can. And economic sanctions like crazy, right? We sanctioned everything. We stole Citgo.
A U.S. federal judge ordering the seizure of Venezuela's only sizable U.S. asset, the familiar Citgo Petroleum.
Now, why would this be? Well, Venezuela has tons of oil. Some say it's the first or second largest reserves in the world left. They, in many ways, are going outside the petrodollar. Now, of course, with Citgo, that was in U.S. dollars, but a lot of the sales between Venezuela and Iran, etc., outside the petrodollar, right? So you have oil sold outside the dollar. Well, I just noticed this little seed that I hadn't realized. I missed this if it happened a few weeks ago or whatever. So the U.S. has put sanctions on Venezuela, but eventually, gut-wrenching sanctions. The UN says we've killed 100,000 people in Venezuela with our sanctions. Yay, U.S. And who do we kill? We kill only the top leaders, right? No, sanctions, of course, kill the children, the babies, the sick, the elderly. That's who it kills. The U.S. has lightened some of the sanctions, some of the economic war on Venezuela to allow Venezuela to sell some of their oil. And here's from the Washington Post just the other day. The U.S. Treasury general license issued last year allows buyers from around the world to purchase Venezuelan crude oil and pay for it in what? U.S. dollars. We are allowing Venezuela to sell their own oil as long as they do it in U.S. dollars. We have an economic war on them, but this is the one caveat we've come up with. You can sell your oil, I guess. I guess we'll let you sell your oil as long as you do it in petrodollars. Yet again, we see that what the U.S. really cares about is defending these petrodollars. And I have, climate change climate crisis is destroying the planet. We're seeing it again and again and again around the world. It's going to keep getting worse. All the charts show it's like a hockey stick. The heat is shooting up. The ocean temperature is higher than ever before. Climate crisis is getting worse and worse. And the U.S. is fighting at every turn to make sure oil continues to be pumped endlessly. Because without the petrodollar, the U.S. loses its power. And it amazes me that that aspect of it, I'm not saying no one's ever said the word petrodollar, but that aspect of it is never connected to climate crisis that I hear. Almost no one, even those fighting to stop fossil fuels, don't seem to connect that the U.S. has this massive existential bias toward continuing to pump fossil fuels. Yes, they also make a lot of money from fossil fuels, so there's that too. But they could make a lot of money from other things. The U.S. could, other forms of energy. But the reason that the other forms of energy, they do these little, we'll have 12 rechargeable electric cars, or like, the reason they barely do anything about it is because they need oil. They need oil pumped endlessly around the world.